Okay. In your pamphlet, it says CPRS, ethics. We're going to do just ethics and boundaries. We will cover at the very beginning some of the CPRS ethics, but I've got a question for all of you. How many have read your ethics for your specific job in the last year? Yes, you do. You have to. Thank you. Good. I am glad to see that. I'm what they call an ethics nerd. So I like to go around and talk to people. And the first thing, what is ethics? We want to know. It's what is good or bad with moral duty and obligation. It conducts governing of an individual or group. Like when I was just talking about the code of ethics for whomever you work with, that is your conduct governing. And there are 19 codes for CPRS. And when we go through them, and I'm sure, think about your code of ethics. This one, it talks about taking care of yourself, being in recovery, fostering your own lifelong learning. We need to be teachable. And then when you look at these, it starts dealing with harassment, behaviors that are unprofessional and unethical. So the CPRS has all this. And I'm just gonna skip on through. So I wanna get to the meat of this, boundaries. Are boundaries important? Yes. How many of us have had poor boundaries before and had to deal with the consequences? Yeah, I know that I wasn't taught boundaries growing up. I had to learn what boundaries were after I became an adult. So I know a lot of you out there can probably relate to that. But there are unofficial rules about what should or should not be done. It puts limits. And it's important that we always have boundaries. When we're working with members, clients, peers, whatever word that your agency uses, to make sure that you have a healthy environment, you have a good engagement and rapport with the person you are working with, you need boundaries. When I worked in the field, the very first thing I did was I met with a person and I had a sheet of paper. How can you get in touch with me? What's the best way? How am I going to respond back to you? And boundaries. If you're 15 minutes or more late, we'll have to reschedule your meeting. We go through that. Also, big one, just by being a citizen here in Tennessee, you're a mandatory reporter. What do you think would happen if someone, a peer you were working with, didn't know about mandatory reporting and they told you some very sensitive information that maybe dealt with child or adult abuse that you have to report? What's going to happen with your relationship with that person? That's right. You're going to break trust. And when we break trust, I know when I've done it in my life, I couldn't always get it back. And if I did, I had to really work hard to get it back. So it's important we let people know up front, expectations and boundaries. And the history of boundaries. I've been in the field 33 years. So I come from the traditional system. Institutionalization was big. A lot of people I worked with would come to our program and they were still in the state mental hospitals. Professional distance. It was huge. When we would have centers for peers to come to, it would not be on the property of the agency. They kept it peers over here, professionals over here, and it was a wide gap. And it was segregation. That's exactly what it was, because we're all human beings. But nowadays, you see it's community-based. That's why we have so many wonderful centers, agencies, and community mental health centers. We're now helping people in their communities. And that's important. That's where someone feels safe. And to work on this, you have to make sure that people feel safe. And mutuality. I'm in long-term recovery for mental health. So when I'm working with someone, I can talk about that. I can talk about what I've experienced. And that's where you get the engagement. You're setting those boundaries. You're getting that engagement in there. People want to be part. And then person first. And we just heard about that when she went over trauma-informed care. Person first language. It's not about being politically correct. It's about being respectful and respecting those you serve. In the history, we've formed a different paradigm shift lately. We want the person to be involved in their care, to have their wishes and directions of how they want to go be validated by you. Because I could tell somebody what to do all day long, and then if it doesn't work out, who are they going to be mad at? So it's important that we draw them into their own recovery. And it does require supervision. That's really important, and sometimes it gets swept under the rug. Having good supervision, ongoing supervision. You can start a dialogue with your supervisor about how you can best care for others. Get some new ideas. I always tell when I'm training, I tell people, be curious. Best thing you can do is ask questions. People genuinely like to talk about themselves. So asking open-ended questions, that's a good way to get it going. Then you may not have to talk the rest of the session, and you're going to learn more about that person. The biggest contributing factor to ethical and boundary problems is when a role is not clearly defined. If you don't have a good job description, you haven't been informed of what the policies of your agency dictate and expect, you could have some big boundary issues. So it's up to you to make sure you educate yourself on your agency's policies. And it's really important because we need to know where we end and the other person begins. And I always say, I only go as far as to the end of my nose. That's me. And whatever's past that is you. And I have to respect that. A boundary in the workplace gives you this ability. It lets you set up a good practice. And up there it says professional boundaries define limits and responsibility in the workplace. Very important. And like I said, some of this still talks about CPRS, the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist, because you're not hired because of your illness, whether that be SUD or mental health. You're not hired for that. You are hired and valued for your skills, your experience, and your stories in recovery. And that makes you important. It makes you an expert on you. And it gives you a lot of information to connect with someone. And I have to mention this, because when we are talking with people, if we're not careful, we can traumatize and re-traumatize people. So what I always say is, share the scar, not the wound. If it's still happening, it's a wound. And if you've got a wound open, how likely is it you could be traumatized? How many of you in here have worked with your supervisor to develop a plan in case you are traumatized or have compassion fatigue? You already have a plan in place. Yeah, I see 2 people. You know, if you got to make a plan, because if you're in this field long enough, it's not if you're going to be triggered or have compassion fatigue, it's when. And the important part of that is to plan how to take care of yourself. Self-care, I can't say enough about that. And self-care includes boundaries and ethics. You got to be good at setting boundaries. Your work phone goes off at 5:30. How many of you in here are going to answer it? Yeah. How many of you check your emails at night? Yeah, we're starting to see some boundary issues here in this group. But disclosure boundaries. There's 7 tools to guide you in disclosing, because you really have to be clear about your ethics and your boundaries if you're going to disclose your story or any bits and parts. First, you got to orientate the person to disclosure. You know, I'm really glad you shared that with me, Jennifer. I've gone through a similar situation. Do you mind if I tell you about it? Ask permission. They may not be in a spot they want to hear your story. They just need the support. So ask permission. And remembering, you are disclosing to inspire hope. Not to vent, not to talk about, I tell you what, I have had it with my brother. We're not getting into all that. We want to make sure we give them the area to talk. And your timing, you don't want to just blah all over everybody with your whole story. The timing is just as important. And focus and select to the person's recovery goals. I always say wait, W-A-I-T. Why am I talking? Yeah, am I talking to hear my story for me? Am I talking to make myself feel better? Or am I talking to that person sitting across from me? And don't disclose too frequently. We want to make sure that we're allowing the person to have the floor. Because remember, when you're talking and running your mouth, you can't hear. You're not listening, not actively. And don't burden the already overburdened. We are there to inspire hope, not dump. So we need to make sure. And be flexible. I think that is so important in our jobs, to be flexible. You may have planned out a specific activity for the group that you're running today. You get in there, someone had was at the hospital all night and is not doing well. You may have to switch gears. Be open to what is going to best serve those we serve. And dual relationships, I have to talk about these. It's so easy. Remember, we're friendly, but we're not friends. And I know a lot of times I have to have the conversation. They'll say, oh, here's Jennifer, she's my friend. And then I have to pull them aside and say, I'm not your friend. I'm your peer specialist. I'm your therapist. I'm your case manager. There again, what are we doing? Establishing boundaries. And it's important because that protects the person you're working with, and it can protect you in the long run so you can't be accused of anything. If you're not doing friendly stuff, then you've created that boundary. And dual relationships is when you have a relationship with someone outside of your professional setting. Types of dual relationships: family member, church member, neighbor, teacher, employer, friend, sex partner. It doesn't matter. All of those are dual relationships. And do we enter into dual relationships as a professional? No. There are agencies that have different guidelines about this around. Some agencies, after a person has left treatment and been gone for a year, 5 years, in there, you can start up a relationship. Then there are other agencies, if they've ever been in that program, you can't start a relationship. And it's the same with my social work license. Once I've served a person, there's no other relationship behind that. So we need to be aware of that. Know what your agency policy is. And in dual relationships, it can't be avoided. We just have some that no matter what, we can't get around. When you go to a store, maybe you stop every morning and get a cup of coffee at the convenience store, and you've got to know the clerk. If they came into your agency, by definition, that would be a dual relationship. So you would get with your supervisor and say, you know, I see this person every morning. I don't think it's going to cause a problem, but let's stay on top of it. In acquaintances, maybe people you see at gatherings like this. You don't see me another time of the year. That's an example of that one. Maybe you're going to a support group. That could be 12-step. What if somebody's in your 12-step group? Definitely get with your supervisor. I know I'm trying to change it with the mic. And there are different levels of involvement. As you see up here, the low minimum, run into a peer at the local market, at the movie theater, at the ball game. And hopefully you've had the discussion that if I see you in public, I can't come up to you. But if you come up to me and acknowledge my presence, then I will talk to you. We are confidentiality there in the boundary. And we need to let them know that up front, because since I've been in the field so long, I run into people everywhere. And here's a story for transparency. When I was hospitalized for mental health, I went in the first day. There sits one of my clients. What do you do? Well, I didn't go up to him because I still had to be professional, even though we were both seeking help. And he got mad about it because this was young in my career. I had not talked to him about, I can't come up to you in public. So I caused my own problem. The social worker on the unit explained to him, and he came up to me later that day. You just never know where you're going to run into someone. Minimum level, maybe attending church every Sunday or a PTA meeting. So we're seeing them more often. It's not just a chance encounter. And the medium level, we're seeing them in groups that we're connected to. Then the intense level is peers, you socialize, you attend functions, you serve on committees together on a regular basis. You definitely want to get to your supervisor about that. You want to make sure that you and the person you serve are taken care of. Maybe another person needs to take over that. Could be. And you know, at times you may want to ask the client you're working with, what do you prefer? I mean, it is their recovery. It is their decision. So they should have a weigh-in on that. And harmful. Dual relationships can be very harmful if not careful. You have unequal power. You're over them. And they feel like they're trying to work it. And I want you to be so proud of me. And they're trying to please you. Privileged information. Yeah, you may get some information that you really don't need. You know, you don't want to sit in there and have them talk about their sexual escapades. You know? Conflict of interest. Dual relationship can be a conflict of interest because of the difference between you two. There again, you got to take care of it. And if you know them in more than one capacity, you may not be able to be completely objective. And if you can't be completely objective, then you're not going to provide good quality evidence-based program for that person. And you may have made up your mind about something. We're human. I know we're not supposed to, but it happens, and you make assumptions. When I teach, because I'm a trainer, that's a big one I talk about to people. Always be self-examining. Look at your prejudices. Look at your biases. How are they affecting the service you're providing? How can you become a better person to provide services? I know I've shared this story a couple of times today about Matt. When I first started training 5 years ago, I was against Matt, trading one drug for another. So I wasn't giving the peers I was working with the advantage of developing their own recovery because of my bias. Since then, I've done research, I've talked to doctors, I've talked to a lot of people who've gone through a MAP program, and now I'm a big cheerleader for it. If I can give someone a chance at life, then I should. Social media. How many of you are in here on social media? Everybody. Check mine at lunch. Yeah. We have to be so careful nowadays. You have to think about who you're friending. I know I meet around 80 to 120 new people a month in training. And they all start sending me friend requests. Well, I don't accept them because I'm training those people to be certified peer recovery specialists. And I'll be a mentor, I'll be a model, but I'm not gonna be your friend on social media. Then you've let them into your personal life. Now, some people have professional pages where people can friend them. Check with your agency. Definitely check with your agency. I have worked places where even supervisors could not be social media partners with their people they served. And we couldn't be for people we served. Find out what your agency says. But I tell you, for me, it is not a good deal. I don't do it. And that even can go into their family. You know? You need to think about that. It may not be the peer that you're working directly with. It could be their sister. You can still have as many issues crop up with that. And never post any information or personal comments about someone you're working with. Unfortunately, this one happens quite a bit. I wished I could say different, but that's why we're talking about it, is we want to protect those we serve. And you know, anything we post, even if we delete it, is still there. And then you've put it out over a huge audience. Confidentiality. No HIPAA. Know your company policy on confidentiality. This is to protect the people that we serve. Remember though, there are those times if they say they're going to hurt themselves or another person, they talk about elder abuse, abuse of a vulnerable citizen, sexual abuse. We've got to turn those in. But remember, the thing on that, I always get asked, but what if they were just kidding? I don't care, it's not my responsibility. Once they've told me to decide if they really did it or not, are they lying? Did it happen too far in the past? That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to report it to the proper abuse line. And a good way to do that is have the person with you, call the line, tell them who you are, and hand the phone off and be their support. That is the best way. You're really empowering people to advocate for themselves, to move forward in their recovery. So you can do it that way. But like it says, this is important because each protections enhance confidence and encourage the free flow of information. So if you want to keep having those great conversations, you've got to make sure you've navigated this clearly. And two of the most common ethical violations are confidentiality. You know, you're walking down the hallway, you see the therapist, she said, was Jennifer in group today? Yeah, and this is what we talked about, right in the hallway. Not thinking about it, it's not malicious, but instead of stepping into a room, we've just put Jennifer's stuff out there in the hall. And unfortunately, sexual misconduct is a big one that we need to be aware of. And that's sad because that is taking total advantage of those we serve. And as I've been saying right here, the confidentiality exceptions when you are mandated to report, disclosure of child abuse, elder abuse, planned and desired to injure oneself or someone else. And sometimes you need to go to your supervisor and discuss this person. I'm not sure where to go with Jennifer. She's brought up some ideas and things that she wants to do, but I'm not clear on them. Or I'm working with Jennifer and she now wants to go on the MAP program, but she's pregnant. Can she do that? Those are great questions to take to your supervisor. All right, we've got a little scenario here. I'm gonna have you guys help me. Tony is a highly sought after peer recovery specialist. He is charismatic and unrelenting in his support of peers he works with. As his supervisor, you may have one area of concern about Tony. He's emotionally possessive of those he works with and hypercritical of other service providers. Many that Tony serves do well in their recovery, but seem to see the source of their recovery as Tony rather than themselves. Your concern is that the peer Tony works with seem to have developed an excessive emotional dependence on him. I want you to think about that. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come down there with you guys and let's talk about Tony. Let's see what we'll do. All right. Raise your hand if you've got an idea of what you want to work on with Tony. What are we going to do with Tony? Are we just going to keep on letting him do his thing? What are we going to do? Raise your hands and I'll come to you.
Talk emotional boundaries.
Emotional boundaries. We're back into boundaries and ethics. What else? What type of emotional boundaries are we going to discuss with Tony?
Unequal power.
I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. Unequal power.
Unequal power. Yes. Going to discuss with Tony what that looks like. Maybe he doesn't know that. What else are we going to discuss with Tony? Let's hear from this side of the room. I'm going to start picking on people.
So maybe Tony doesn't realize that he's being hypercritical of other service providers. Maybe he doesn't realize that when he's talking to others.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't realize he's being hypercritical. He just wants the best for everybody. I agree with that.
Coming from experience, a lot of ego-driven people, we don't realize that we're so ego-driven until it's pointed out to us by one of our coworkers. So maybe call Tony into the office and just have a little chat with him.
I think that's smart. We're going to call him in and have a little chat. What are we going to chat about?
Because sometimes it can be overbearing for people. I know he's trying to help, but then he got to let them try to help themselves. You just can't push, you know. You got to just wait and see. Lay it out there and let them do the work, not him. Because they coming to him for it. He can do it.
Yeah. Definitely. I'll go here and then I'll be back there.
Hi, thank you. So the sentence that struck me was, many that Tony serves do well in their recovery, but seem to see the source of their recovery as Tony rather than themselves. And I get that Tony is really passionate about what he does, but he's going to have to learn how to separate himself and allow those that he's serving to strategically use the tools that he's equipping them with and trust them that they're going to continue their path to recovery. And perhaps Tony needs to talk to someone, another professional, about setting boundaries and about how to separate himself from his work, because you don't want your people to depend on you personally. You want them to rely on the tools that you equip them with.
Thank you. Thank you. Huh? Okay, well, tell us what she didn't.
Well, one of the things is, if he's in a recovery program, how's he doing in his recovery program? You know, how's he doing? Because, you know, if he's got that ego going on, edging God out is one of the mottos that we use. That could be something for him to look at.
I'm sorry. How is Tony's recovery? Anybody want to talk about Tony's recovery? He better be still in it, yeah. Yeah. So we're going to look at him, bring him into the office, and have a talk. But how we address Tony could affect how the situation's going to work. How would you address Tony to get the best outcome you could? So none of y'all are going to address Tony. We're just going to let him go.
Really simple. Praise, polish, praise.
I love praise, polish, praise. I call it a learning moment instead of polish. Praise, have a learning moment, then praise.
Hello. So I would sit down with Mr. Tony and ask him about boundaries, and also ask for him to just share his recoveries, coping strategies, and allow the clients or peers, because from what I'm reading, he's overextending and oversharing. So just allow the clients or peers just to see and allow them to build, but also just let them know, like, hey, we got to work on boundaries and not pour too much of ourselves into our work.
What happens when you pour too much of yourself into your work? Burnout. How many of you have been in burnout? That's hard to come back from. It took me a couple of years. You don't want to go there.
I think first and foremost, Tony's role needs to be clarified. He needs to be educated on what his role is, his responsibilities, and perhaps even some role playing with him so that he can understand what is appropriate responses.
Thank you. Yeah, role playing. You can do that in supervision. I used to do that all the time. You're going to have to talk to this person. It might be a little uncomfortable. So let's role play it before you meet with them. What would you like to say to them and why? And going through that. And helping Tony to move forward too, because we want to make sure that we protect and support him just as much. I mean, my goodness, how many of us would not like to have charismatic and unrelenting in support? I'd hire him in a minute. Yeah. But then we can talk about and develop plans to help him grow. Because when I hire someone, my expectation is I'm hiring you to take my job. I want you to get so good at what you're doing, you take my job. And that's what I want to set Tony up for. And kind of reel him back. But I mean, if you've got somebody who is just supportive to the people they serve, they're there for them. We want to make sure we have given them all of the tools they need to be a success. And boundaries and ethics can make you have a success. Do y'all have any questions? I know it's after lunch. And we're doing ethics after lunch, but y'all have been great.
I just had one thing to add because I love talking on the microphone. But I would encourage Tony to practice self-care.
Who all in here has a self-care plan? I have a written self-care plan. I tell you what I'm going to do every day, every week, monthly, quarterly, keep up with my doctor's appointments, making sure I'm doing that, talking to my support system every day. Yeah, because if we're empty, we have nothing to give. And if we're empty and we're trying to give, it's even harder. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Self-care is so important.
So I would also like to add, I'm a CPRS, and yes, and it's very important to have these meetings with our fellow peers and our colleagues to debrief, especially like after a long, heavy week, just so we can show up for not just ourselves, but just showing support to our colleagues and peers, and just have that environment that we can pour into each other, but also be a soundboard so we not over pouring our personal information, but also be an open channel to receive that information and give support that is not in a lens of trauma.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. All right. Does anyone else have a question or a comment you would like to share? I see you. You had your hand up? Okay, I'll go here and then I'll go there.
Just one concern. Heaven forbid Tony was to, let's just say, relapse. I think Tony has allowed all of his peers that he's working with to put him on a pedestal. And if anybody has ever had a sponsor say that you put on the pedestal and they relapsed, how many of his sponsees or her sponsees have relapsed because they put them in such high esteem? Very dangerous place.
It is a dangerous place, yes, Andy. We walk side by side. I'm not above you. I'm not below you. I'm beside you.
So I guess mine is more of like a statement, but a question as well. So I see that Tony is someone that his, I guess, clients are leaning to a lot. And what I've seen like in the past, and kind of probably a little bit that I've struggled with working with my clients, is wanting to be relatable to them, because sometimes the story that they have is very similar to your story, but also making sure that you're self-centered and making sure it's about them. And what I'm thinking is maybe Tony is feeling like, well, this is how I would be able to recover from how I'm going through stuff, so let me be able to be that person for them, and then sometimes kind of overshare to the point where it's like, now it's not it's a thin line between that boundary of whether he's the professional or if, the client. So I guess that was all I had to say.
Yeah, we've got to stop and look at that. What do you share when? Yeah, and a lot of times I'll share just a small 2 or 3 sentence. Like, I really feel what you're saying right now because X, Y, and Z happened to me, and this is what helped me. Notice I'm not saying you need to do this.
Okay, so that was one of the things that I talked with one of my supervisors, and they were like, sometimes you can catch yourself in that moment of saying, I understand because everyone that goes through, they could go through the exact same thing that you went through, but they take it completely different. So it's like when you say, well, I understand because, well, you wasn't like with me when I went through what I went through. So it's kind of like, it's a catch-22. Like, it's hard to say like, oh, I understand because everyone are different. So it's like you kind of understand, but at the same time, you really don't because everyone handles trauma or situations completely different from another. So that was one of the things that was like a dilemma for me because it's like I don't want to say I understand, but I also want you to know like I'm in this like space with you. So what's a good way to like, I guess, say that?
Well, first off, you're going to ask. I relate, yes. Yes, I relate. And that's important. And tell them what you relate about. They may be feeling alone out there. I like that. Thank you. I relate. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you for not going to sleep on me. I'm being active. I appreciate it. Have a good day.